I have so many questions for you. I'm going to try to get through them all. And I know you have a ton to say. You just got off your own live stream. I don't know how you have the energy to do all of this, but maybe you can give us some tips at the end of this. So, Dr. Paul, the reason that I wrote originally to speak with you is because I saw this on the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity here. Biden administration completely kills the "it's a private company, so it's not censorship" argument. Now, this was written by Caitlin Johnstone, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on it. Down here it says that Psaki told the White House press corps the administration has a list of accounts who produce most of the anti-vaccine information on Facebook, which civil libertarians are decrying as an obviously authoritarian government overreach. I'm curious, could we start there? What are your thoughts? Maybe specifically on COVID misinformation and deplatforming, not just of people discussing it, but doctors and scientists themselves who have been, discussing how they're treating patients. But generally speaking, what you think about the relationship between government and these big tech platforms at this point.
Well, it's all been created by the government and by regulations, because if you lived in a free society and there was an understanding that you had a right to say whatever you want, that it was meant mostly for the people to be able to criticize their own government without getting into trouble. And the First Amendment wasn't meant for talking about the weather. So the circumstances today are so artificial. It has nothing to do with living in a free society. And it's interesting, it's gotten much worse in this last year or two. And that has to do with, can a private company regulate your speech? Do they have the right to do this? And many libertarians, including myself, the first reaction is, no, we can't regulate, a private company. It's like a private newspaper. And, there are limits even under those circumstances. You can't slander people. So there are limits in the free market. It isn't you can say or do anything you want, but it's got more complicated now. But matter of fact, I thought it got complicated early on, even when the radio came into being and there was licensing by the government. And then you had the fair competition speech where you had to have both sides. They went through that. But so it's a messier deal right now because we have the social media, the text, and they have so much ability to pass out information and collect information. And then again, well, if they did that, if they're a free market and they collect the information, I would think that they ought to have an agreement with the people they're taking the information from, but technically they probably claim they do. But that is one thing that they have done. But the big problem is they get all this information, but they do it in collusion with the government. That's where the real problem is. So I don't see the tech companies, the social media, as being a freedom newspaper that's just publishing. So therefore, it's not an easy thing to happen. And once again, I think most libertarians don't want to just regulate, say you can't say this and that. Nobody wants to get into that. But the one thing that they could do is make sure they're on their own, that these companies don't get any assistance whatsoever from any legal means. That you ought to be able to sue these companies if they're slandering somebody. But it's very difficult to sue them. They get money from the government. So I consider it corporatism. It's a mixture. It's a bad one. And right now, the private companies are the censors of everything that we say, and the government dictates to the censors, and they get away with, oh, you can't do that, and then they play on us, the libertarians. So you can't tell us what to do. We have a freedom of speech. So it's a messy situation, but I think it came from the fact that the companies are in collusion with the government and have permitted this mess. But it's a system of corporatism, crony corporatism, and something that can dangerously morph into fascism.
So I was reading an article from a while back, I think maybe 10 years ago, that you and others were concerned about regulating the internet and what that would look like. Of course, now there's a lot of conversation. Should Section 230 be reformed? What would you do to solve this problem? Have you thought about that? Any ideas on what the option is? Because have you changed your mind, I guess, from the way you used to think about it 10 years ago?
I'd make sure there are no benefits, no checks leaving the government treasury to these companies. So if the CIA comes and say, we need this list and we'll pay you a little bit for that, I don't want any transactions like that. That should be banned. It's a little bit harder dealing with this after they've created a mess. Should have been done at the beginning, but at the beginning is when they got the exemption, that you couldn't sue them for what they were doing. So that should be eliminated. They shouldn't be able to do anything or say anything, and people don't have any recourse. So it isn't so simple, because especially if you're sensitive about not overstepping your bounds and starting to do something that we're complaining about. We're complaining because they're regulating speech, our speech, because we happen to be disseminating it, on the social media. So it's very messy. But I think the mess is the government's been involved both financially and also the protection of what they're doing for the benefit of national security purposes. And then it got much worse. Now it's just interfering with science. You said something that, it's not science, and you're not helping us make the country safe and secure from the coronavirus. So it's totally out of control. So I just think clarifying some of these rules are possible, and we should, but we don't seem to be making much of an attempt to correct it.
I'm curious, do you think that their effort to silence alternative voices that they don't feel like fit their narrative, of course they would say it's because it's disinformation. Do you think they're achieving their goal of actually silencing those voices and quelling the bad choices that they're so afraid of? Because when I hear from my audience, it sounds like it's making people more skeptical and less trusting of the messaging.
Well, that's the test. Is it going to do one or the other? I happen to want to be an optimist and think that it does wake people up. But at the same time, a lot of people suffer, and you might have to make things a lot worse. I think in terms of some of the things that we do in our military, how bad things had to get in the 60s. In the 60s, I was in the service because I had been drafted, but it took an awful lot of killing and damage done before the American people woke up. Enough is enough, and demonstrate in the streets. We don't want any more. Bring the people home. And that's sort of the way that's going on. I think people are stirring and people are getting annoyed. I think a lot of people were waking up with the lockdown, and that's all been good. But the opposition is alive and well. Here we think we're achieving. There's more openness. They're allowing us to leave the house without a mask on. So they allowed this, but all of a sudden next week, we think we might have to put all those regulations back on. So it's almost a steady, eternal battle between liberty and government. And that's also the argument for minimizing the size and scope of government a lot. And the founders tried it, but I think we have to admit they haven't been all that successful. There's some good words there, and I think the most important said was by John Adams. He says, nothing we did today on giving you a constitution will work if you don't have a moral people. So the rules don't make people better, and they're always going to cheat if they will. So so there's two atmospheres. How do we work with the morality of the people at the same time devising laws that will try to prevent them from abusing the rights of others?
If you like wine or coffee or both, here are two of my sponsors that help you support my work and have something great to drink while you watch my videos. The first is AllisonWinePromo.com, Allison with 1L winepromo.com. You get 50% off some of my favorite Argentinian Malbecs and 50% off shipping. One of these bottles comes from the third highest vineyard in the world. They use no flavoring or dyes, no filtering, and no excess chemicals. But if coffee is more your beat, then check out TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison, TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison. These are all Nicaraguan coffees. They keep many of the jobs local because they grow, select, roast, and package in Nicaragua. They are USDA certified organic, shade grown, and high altitude. So again, TwinEngineCoffee.com/Allison, AllisonWinePromo.com. Have a great glass of coffee, a great glass of wine, and support free speech, whatever you're drinking. I've heard you say a couple times recently, that there are forces trying to create chaos that then benefit those who are in control. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I think is happening is because I believe that culture of Marxism is a real thing and is a real movement. It's been around for a long time, but it's really been accelerated. And there's a lot of collusion between corporatism and the corporations and big government. But I think the Marxists haven't been bashful about their philosophy, and it's well written and it's historic, it's long lasting, that they don't want to modify what we have. Matter of fact, that's been emphasized even more so, that approach didn't work. Yes, they introduced some fascism and it came in, and we have people all lined up with liberalism and pseudo socialism and all this stuff. But they also believe now, I think the dominant theme for the Marxists is you got to get rid of it, and they're blunt about it. You have to destroy it, and you have to start it from scratch, and we will have a better chance. So yes, I think that's the only way I can understand the nuttiness that's going on. Why are they doing this, and why are they doing this, and why would they have these wars where both sides get killed? And it's all, I can only explain this to myself, at least, is that the chaos makes an opportunity. Just look at economic chaos brings it. We haven't had very many declared Marxists in our Congress, and we're getting more of those. And even the socialists never would admit they're socialists, but there's more of that because of the chaos. So, and everything they do in the name of free enterprise it has turned out to be a disaster, because the system that we have today has nothing to do with true capitalism, true freedom of the economy. If you have inflationism, if you have a Federal Reserve, or if you have an IRS, if you have the assumption that one of the other basic assumptions which has caused so much harm is that I bet you 9 people out of 10, if not more, endorse the idea the responsibility of the government is to make us safety and secure, and to be taken care of and have a safety net and take care of all the bad people around the world. And that's why we put our military sky high, no matter how many dumb things that is done with our military, how many wars that we've been involved. So that is the real problem that we have, is allowing our governments to do too much. So I think the goal of defining exactly the limited government, then again, it's going to take more than just that, because if even with the shortcomings of our Constitution, if we'd have followed more of it, we wouldn't have changed it to endorse the income tax. We wouldn't have a police state to police the world. We wouldn't have a Federal Reserve system. So it's the people that give up on it. The temptation to say, "Oh, I can't handle all this liberty. You got to take care of me." And so we have to build the enthusiasm for wanting, for moral and for personal reasons, to want to live in a free society. I've said, and I truly believe, if it took just getting the government out of all the bailouts, and all of us got a bit poorer, and we had to start from scratch, probably if we truly could push the government aside, I think the country would be back on its feet again, and happier and wealthier than ever before. Right now, it's pseudo wealth. It's all fake. It's all pretense that that the country keeps getting wealthier. No, you can, if you and I went out and we lined up credit of $1 million a month, maybe we'll need 2 pretty soon, $1 million a month, and they had a line of credit and they kept sending us the money, we could look very wealthy, and we would be doing very well. I don't know whether it would be, if it was being handed to us, I'm not sure that would bring happiness. But at the same time, it ends. Finally, the banker doesn't loan the money. And right now, the banker, people like China, and China buys our stuff. We buy their stuff, we send them money, and then they use that money to buy up stuff that we said, oh, they shouldn't be allowed to do that. So it's a system, and that depends on understanding economics. That's why I emphasize so much. The most important thing is understanding free market economics, which I follow the Austrian school of economics. It's sound money, limited government, but I can't divide the true free market from the civil liberties of a free society, because property is part of that plan. To have freedom, you have to have property in the equation, and therefore government, what I'm talking about is not on the horizon, but maybe people will think about it because we'll have to rebuild it. But I think government could be reduced 90%, and people in a short period of time could thrive. But then we have the danger of how much violence is going to occur, how much morality will it be? Will it mean that the people that have their freedom back will not practice the non-aggression principle, and they just get their own armies and everybody starts killing each other? So it's a dual thing. The size of government, though, is the real problem, and the undermining of personal liberty and responsibility. So I see, if I do anything, when I was in Congress or whatever, I've always seen my responsibility, if I can think through and believe I'm on the right track and do my best to present it and find the truth, to try to get people to understand it. One of the reasons why I have a homeschooling program, I don't think the solution is in Washington, D.C. and saying this is what you have to do, because those people who got there by means that aren't exactly ethical. And every year it gets worse. I compared to what I knew about Congress in the 1970s when I first went to Congress compared to 9, and I thought I got along pretty well with the opposition. And I keep wondering to myself, because on a social basis, I made an attempt to get along with them because I thought if I was friendly with people, they would more likely, at least have an open mind to it. But I think that education is the most important reason why we should believe in true freedom and true property rights, and it, to me, is a civil liberty, and then apply the basic principle of non-aggression to everything that we do, and say, voluntarism is better than compulsion and mandates from the government. We can take care of ourselves. We don't need the government. The government is the outfit that's given us so much trouble.
So on that note, one more question about COVID. How would you have handled it differently? And, if you're the government and you've made the decision that you're going to have these lockdowns, whether there's the states making those decisions, cities, the federal government has its own authority. What would you, I guess, have recommended for local governments? What do you feel like the role of the federal government should have been? And then as it relates to the money that has been given to people to get through, all the people that have lost their jobs, people that can't afford rent. What would your thoughts have been on that? Because I actually, to bring up my locals platform where people have put in some questions, one person asked what your thought is on modern monetary theory, and the idea of federal government printing more money and handing out, more money in order to keep people afloat, I guess in a particularly unique situation like COVID. So I know it's a kind of a lot to throw your way, but just curious how you would have, I guess, generally speaking, handled the situation differently.
Well, obviously they did way too much. The lockdown was a little bit nutty, and it was an attack on liberty. So a lot less. I would talk, and I have talked, for this past year. One of the dangers that we're getting into is the idea that government practices medicine and they do it well. They don't. We should have separation of medicine and the state, just like most people in the past have accepted this notion that there's a separation of church and state. We should have the separation of education in the state. We should have the separation of medicine in the state, which means that money shouldn't have been spent. Because in spite of the fact that it looks like it might help some people, and some people said, oh, I loved it when those checks were coming, I was getting along, but now I need more, don't stop. And they're screaming, will always be, there's a shortage of money. So somebody comes along with the modern monetary theory, and he elect us because we believe we should drop the money from helicopters. And they literally are doing that. I'm amazed at the efficiency of making an announcement on Monday, and by Friday they've issued checks and people are receiving checks for $1,600 in the mail. It's unbelievable, but it doesn't create wealth. Creating monetary units has nothing to do with creating wealth. It transfers wealth. Some people get richer, but other people get poorer. And the rich get richer. It is true under this system. And the worst thing that we have to deal with is the whole idea that the Marxists the socialists can always say, look at the mess you people have created, and yet they'll blame freedom for it. And that is a big problem. So therefore, they're arguing the case for Marxism, more radical socialism, where the whole thing is we've had way too much government. So we should be continuing to talk about getting rid of the Fed, get rid of the IRS, but introduce this this unique notion that you're responsible for yourself. And you're responsible for your life. Your life is your own. You can do what you want. Just don't hurt other people. And the world would be better off, and you'd be a happier person, and we would more likely be free and prosperous.
As it relates to, again, this idea of either creating or allowing for chaos in order to come in with the solution, which it does often seem to be an increase in government control. I wanted your thoughts on January 6th, what happened specifically on that day, and then also the subsequent prosecution of hundreds of people, some of whom didn't even enter the Capitol building, and this contextualization of their behavior as part of domestic terrorism, even though they haven't necessarily been charged with that and had to prove that in court. Just curious about your thoughts on that whole proceeding.
Well, once again, it was used as a tool, just like I mentioned in economics. If you have people suffering because of government and welfareism and all the nonsense they have, they come in and say, oh, you have too much freedom, too much freedom. So this is what they're going to do. They blame the people for going in there, and they were a rowdy bunch. But they didn't carry any weapons. They didn't kill anybody. The government killed more people. Now there's something strange going on, that the policemen that were so-called in charge are committing suicide. So it's very strange about what is happening. But yes, I think there should be arrests made. I think there should be some. If they were destroying property, there should be misdemeanors. But what we really need is an honest, open government. Thousands and thousands of hours of video. Maybe we ought to have the right to see that, instead of somebody harboring them and hiding them from the people, to find out who really was responsible. Because a lot of people weren't responsible enough to be put in solitary confinement without due process and without having been seen by a judge to find out what their charges are. That's where the real crime is. The fact that a bunch of people went in there and they were rowdy, that's one thing. But that's about a 1 on a scale of 100 compared to it's about a 95 for how the government has been handling what's been going on, and using it once again to scare people to death, the same way with this virus that isn't anything compared to what they have described it to be. And now the variant is even worse than the COVID. And we have to go back to all that nonsense again, all the lies that they tell. That's where our problems are. And that's where our job is. Anybody who cares about what's happening to our country is trying to understand that. On the Liberty Report, Daniel and I try to find out where the answers are in order to pass this information on, because we hear too many lies, and the people are confused because it's hard to sort it out. But it should be boiled down to some simple things like non-aggression. Everything is voluntary. You can't lie, cheat, steal, or kill. And if you do that, you're in big trouble. And there's a right, an obligation in self-defense to take care of individuals like this. But this whole thing was way blown out of proportion. And right now, the crimes against that 500 people that they've been held in confinement without due process, that is a real big crime. And nobody seems to be hardly talking about it. You don't hear about it on the major networks, and you're not likely to.
So, okay, I'm going to try to get a couple more questions in if I can. I know we're running out of time. This is from my locals page again. Everybody head over there if you like to give story ideas and whatnot. What is Ron Paul's #1 concern in regards to the state of our country present day?
Well, in general, it's the loss of liberty and the concern that people have for how the government's going to take care of them. That is the assumption that the government is responsible to make us safe and secure, and the world safe and secure. The whole concept of government, that is the biggest issue, because you can solve all the other problems. And I think in order to get to that point, you have to ask, what is the proper role of a government in a free society? You have to start with, hopefully everybody wants to live in a free society, but that isn't the case because there's always a willingness to give up some of it. No, if you want to live in a free society, what is the role of government? But we don't talk a whole lot about that. The founders really asked that question, and they wrote a document that said, "Thou shalt not." Most everything in the Constitution is telling you what you can't do. Not what. And some people today, the left also always believe that you can do everything you want. The government can do anything it wants unless there's a prohibition in the Constitution that you can't do it. And yet they say, well, there's no prohibition against us having a welfare state and a warfare state. It's our moral obligation to do that. It would be this concept that I think is the most important thing that we do to spread that message.
What do you think about doing away? Is there a possibility, this person asks, about doing away with the current oligarchical ruling class in the U.S.?
Not in a deliberate, organized fashion of getting more people to Congress. That's not going to happen. And even the slower process of what I try to accomplish with homeschooling is get people to understand issues. That helps a little bit, but that takes a long time. So I think the most likely thing that's going to happen is the system that we have is going to come apart. There's no way they can keep doing this. I mean, some of the stuff is just utterly crazy, and anything to do. I don't think there's ever been a financial bubble anywhere close to what we have now. And we now have the federal government monetizing debt. They buy up securities. That is taking care of the debt, $120 billion a month. And I just read yesterday they're going to increase that to $300 billion. Oh, for a short period of time. It makes no sense at all. It is going to be the rejection of the monetary unit, which is the dollar. That's going to bring it down. And then there's going to have a lot of people scurrying around. People are going to have a chance to replace it with something better. Right now, boy, there's a lot of, it's pretty difficult to get too optimistic that all of a sudden we're going to have the rising up of people who actually believe in liberty. But there's a lot more now than there were 35 years ago. I think the understanding of the Federal Reserve System and non-interventionist foreign policy and these various things that existed back in the 60s 70s when I first went to Congress, I think it's much better understood. I think there's a lot more libertarian think tanks now. So but this is the only thing we can do. We can't use force to do it. We can't. And then they turn around and describe it and people buy into it. Oh, there was an insurrection by those libertarian people. They came in and then make up lies and stories about all this violence. Now we have to just stick to our guns because the answer is going to come out of nonviolence, and persuasion and the power of ideas. I think that is so powerful. And like it's been said, you can't stop an idea. Its time has come. And right now, the time has come that we better get our message out about what true liberty is all about.
Okay, your folks are telling me you got to wrap. I was wondering if you had 20 quick seconds to just respond to, we've been watching your son, Senator Rand Paul, one of the few to challenge Dr. Fauci publicly, specifically about this gain-of-function research over in Wuhan, but other things related to COVID. Any thoughts as you've been watching those exchanges, media coverage, or what you think about it all before you go?
No, I think he's doing a great job, and but the biggest point there, and Rand goes over many of the technical points, which are very, very important. But to me, the big point with Rand, I'm sure would agree, is this argument about how this happened and how did the money get through it? Didn't go direct; it went into it. Money is fungible. That's why you shouldn't ever have one nickel of something called foreign aid. Foreign aid is nothing more than taking stuff from poor people in this country through inflation and taxes and giving it to rich people and no oligarchs and people like Fauci and these other people that get involved. So it's that system that created that monster rather than the fact that our job is to go over there and tell them how to run their labs. No, we shouldn't be participating in that at all.
Okay. All right, Dr. Ron Paul, thank you so much.
Sure thing. Nice being with you.